Hello, and welcome back to Storytime with Eric Zimmer. Where we last left off in Where the Red Fern Grows, it's almost dawn, and Billy's grandfather hurt his ankle. Whether it's sprained or twisted, it's one or the other. But we'll see how the rest of the contest goes. I think they're going to make it to the finals. We shall see. So you ready? Alright. Let's begin. Chapter 18. Just before dawn, the storm blew itself out with one last angry roar. It started snowing. A frozen silence settled over the canebrake. Back in the thick timber of the river bottoms, the sharp snapping of frozen limbs could be heard. The tall stalks of wild cane looked exhausted from the hellish night. They were drooping and bending from the weight of the frozen sleet. I climbed out of the deep gully and listened for my dogs. I couldn't hear them. Just as I started back down the bank, I heard something. I listened. Again I heard the sound. Papa was watching me. "Can you hear the dogs?" he asked. "No, not the dogs," I said, "but I can hear something else." "What does it sound like?" he asked. "Like someone whooping," I said. Papa and the judge hurried up the bank. We heard the sound again. It was coming from a different direction. "The first time I heard it," I said, "it was over that-a-way." "It's the men from the camp," the judge said. "They're searching for us." We started whooping. The searchers answered. Their voices came from all directions. The first one to reach us was Mr. Kyle. He looked haggard and tired. He asked if everything was all right. "Yes, we're all right," Papa said, "but the old man has a bad ankle. It looks like we'll have to carry him out." "Your team broke loose and came back to camp about midnight," Mr. Kyle said. "This really spooked us. We were sure something bad had happened. 25 of us have been searching since then." Several men climbed down the bank and went over to Grandpa. They looked at his ankle. One said, "I don't think it's broken, but it sure is a bad sprain." "You're in luck," another one said. "We have one of the best doctors in the state of Texas in our camp, Dr. Charlie Lathman. He'll have you fixed up in no time." "Yes," another said, if I know Charlie, he's probably got a small hospital with him." Back in the crowd, I heard another man say, "You mean that Latham fella? One who owns those black and tan hounds is a doctor?" "Sure is," another one said. "One of the best." Mr. Kyle asked where my dogs were. I told him that they were treed somewhere. "What do you mean, treed somewhere?" he asked. Papa explained what had happened. With a wide-eyed look on his face, he said, "You mean to tell me those hounds stayed with the tree in that blizzard?" I nodded. "Look at me," he said. "Son, I hope they have that coon treed, because you need that one to win the cup. Those two Walker hounds caught 3 before the storm came up. When it got bad, all the hunters came in." The judge spoke up. "I always believed those hounds knew the boy needed another coon to win," he said. "If you fellas had seen some of the things those dogs have done, you'd believe it too." One hunter walked over to the broken snag. 3 out of 1 tree, he said. "No wonder. Looky here. That old snag was half full of leaves and grass. Why, it was a regular old den tree." Several of the men walked over. I heard one say, "I've seen this happen before. Remember that big hunt in the Red River bottoms when the 2 little beagle hounds treed 4 coons in an old hollow snag? They won the championship too." "I wasn't there, but I remember reading about it," one said. "Say, I don't see Benson," Mr. Kyle said. The men started looking at each other. "He was searching farther down river than the rest of us," one fellow said. "Maybe he didn't hear us shouting." Some of the men climbed out of the gully. They started whooping. From a distance we heard an answering shout. "He hears us," someone said. "He's coming." Everyone looked relieved. Mr. Benson stuck the wash out a little way above us. He was breathing hard, as if he had been running. He started talking as soon as he was within hearing distance. "It scared me when I first saw him," he said. "I didn't know what they were. They looked like white ghosts. I'd never seen anything like it." A hunter grabbed Mr. Benson by the shoulder, shaking him. "Get a hold of yourself, man," he said. "What are you talking about?" Mr. Benson took a deep breath to control himself and started again in a much calmer voice. "Those two hounds," he said, "I found them. They're frozen solid. They're nothing but white ice from the tips of their noses to the end of their tails." Hearing Mr. Benson's words, I screamed and ran to my father. Everything started whirling around and around. I felt light as a feather. My knees buckled. I knew no more. Regaining consciousness, I opened my eyes and could dimly see the blurry images of the men around me. A hand was shaking me. I could hear my father's voice, but I couldn't understand his words. Little by little, the blackness faded away. My throat was dry and I was terribly thirsty. I asked for some water. Mr. Benson came over. He said, "Son, I'm sorry, truly sorry. I didn't mean it that way. Your dogs are alive. I guess I was excited. I'm very sorry." I heard a deep voice say, "That's a hell of a thing to do. Come running in here saying dogs are frozen solid." Mr. Benson said, "I didn't mean to sound that way. I said I'm sorry. What more do you want me to do?" The deep voice growled a thing. "I still think it was a hell of a thing for a man to do." Mr. Kyle took over. "Now let's not have any more of this," he said. "We have work to do. We've been standing here acting like a bunch of school kids. All this time that old man has been lying there suffering. A couple of you men cut two poles and can make a stretcher to carry him." While the men were getting the poles, Papa heated the coonskins again and rewrapped Grandpa's foot. With belts and long leather laces from the boots, the hunters made a stretcher. Very gently they put Grandpa on it. Again Mr. Kyle took command. "Part of us will start for camp with them," he said. "The others will go after the dogs." "Here, take this gun," Papa said. "I'll go with him." "Look at me," Mr. Kyle said. "Come on, son, I want to see your hounds." Mr. Benson led the way. "As soon as we get out of this cane," he said, "we may be able to hear 'em. They have the coon treed in that big black gum tree. You're going to see a sight. Now, I mean a sight. They've walked a ring around that tree clear down through ice and snow. You can see the bare ground." "I wonder why they did that," someone asked. "I don't know," Mr. Benson replied, "unless they ran in that circle to keep them freezing to death, or to keep the coon in the tree." I figured I knew why my dogs were covered with ice. The coon had probably crossed the river, maybe several times. Old Dan and Little Ann would have followed him. They had come out of the river with their coats dripping wet, and the freezing blast of the blizzard had done the rest. Nearing the tree, we stopped and stared. "Did you ever see anything like that?" Mr. Benson asked. "When I first saw them, I thought they were white wolves." My dogs hadn't seen us when we camp up. They were trotting round and round. Just as Mr. Benson had said, we could see the path they had worn down through the ice and snow till the bare black earth was visible. Like ghostly white shadows, around and around they trotted. In a low voice someone said, "They know that if they stop, they'll freeze to death." "It's unbelievable," said Mr. Kyle. "Come on, we must do something quick." With a choking sob, I ran for my dogs. On hearing our approach, they sat down and started bawling treed. I noticed their voices didn't have that solid ring. Their ice-covered tails made a rattling sound as they switched this way and that on the icy ground. A large fire was built. Standing my dogs close to the warm heat, the gentle hands of the hunters went to work. With handkerchiefs and scarves heated steaming hot, little by little the ice was thawed from their bodies. "If they had ever lain down," someone said, "they would have frozen to death." "They knew it," another one said. "That's why they kept running in that circle." "What I can't understand is why they stayed with the tree," Mr. Benson said. "I've seen hounds stay with a tree for a while, but not in a northern blizzard." "Men," said Mr. Kyle, "people have been trying to understand dogs ever since the beginning of time. One never knows what they'll do. You can read every day where a dog saved the life of a drowning child or lay down his life for his master. Some people call this loyalty. I don't. I may be wrong, but I call it love. The deepest kind of love." After these words were spoken, a thoughtful silence settled over the men. The mood was broken by the deep growling voice that I had heard back in the washout. It's a shame that people all over the world can't have that kind of love in their hearts, he said. There would be no wars, slaughter, or murder, no greed or selfishness. It would be the kind of world that God wants us to have. A wonderful world. Amen to that. After all the ice was thawed from my dogs and their coats were dried out, I could see they were all right. I was happy again and felt good all over. One of the hunters said, "Do you think those hounds are thawed out enough to fight a coon?" "Sure, just run him out of that tree," I said. At the crack of the gun, the coon ran far out on a big limb and stopped. Again the hunter sprinkled him with bird shot. This time he jumped. Hitting the ground, he crouched down. Old Dan made a lunge. Just as he reached him, the coon sprang straight up and came down on his head. Holding on with his claws, the coon sank his teeth in a long, tender ear. Old Dan was furious. He started turning in a circle, bawling with pain. Little Ann was trying hard to get a hold of the coon, but she couldn't. Because of his fast circling, Old Dan's feet flew out from under him and he fell. This gave Little Ann a chance. Darting in, her jaws closed on the back of the coon's neck. I knew the fight was over. Arriving back at camp, I saw that all the tents had been taken down but ours. A hunter said, "Everyone was in a hurry to get out before another blizzard sets in. Papa told me to take my dogs into the tent as Grandpa wanted to see them. I saw tears in my grandfather's eyes as he talked to them. His ankle was wrapped in bandages. His foot and toes were swollen to twice their normal size. They had turned a greenish-yellow color. Placing my hand on his foot, I could feel the feverish heat. Dr. Latham came over. "You ready to go now?" he asked. Snorting and growling, Grandpa said, "I told you I wasn't going anywhere till I see the gold cup handed to this boy." Turning to face the crowd, Dr. Latham said, "Men, let's get this over. I want to get this man to town. That's one of the meanest sprains I've ever seen. It should be in a cast, but I don't have any plaster of Paris with me." The hunter who came by our tent collecting the jackpot money came up to me. Handing me the box, he said, "Here you are, son. There's over $300 in this box. It's all yours." Turning to the crowd, he said, "Fellas, I can always say this. On this hunt I've seen two of the finest little coon hounds I ever hoped to see." There was a roar of approval from the crowd. Looking down, I saw the box was almost full of money. I was shaking all over. I tried to say thanks, but it was